Okay, class, so I welcome you back to another important lecture. And if you recall, for the previous class, we have discussed that what the chemical communication is, how come the chemical communication is brought about by the hormones, and how come the hormones they would have an impact on the different body parts. And now we would see on toward two major hormones that are important in terms of the blood glucose maintenance. One of them is insulin and the glucagon, and the second hormone that we have to look for today, so that is adrenaline hormone, and that hormone we would see for today that how come this would prepare the body for the fight and the flight situation, or simply when we are in an emergency situation. Now, if you were to see, so here what we have is the insulin, and we have in the with us is the glucagon hormone. And before we proceed, the first scenario is that what problem do we have with the glucose molecule? So you see that this glucose is required by the mitochondria for the aerobic respiration, but itself this is highly soluble. And when this is highly soluble, so it would have a direct impact on the movement of the water. Like if you were to see these two diagrams, now here I have the cells of my body, and by some mean, if the blood glucose outside the cells, this is increasing, so this would lower the water level. And by that, the water would escape out of the cells or the tissues, and by that, the cells or the tissues of our body would shrink. On the other way around, like if I were to be reducing the amount of the glucose outside of my cell, so this would increase the amount of water. And by that, the water would enter into the cells, and when this would happen, so my cells of the body they would start bursting. So none of these situations I can afford. So we eat a diet which is rich in the sugar. So any of the starch that we have eaten, or the maltose, lactose, or the sucrose that we have eaten. So here we would have the glucose with us, and that would lie within the lumen of the small intestines. Now from the small intestine, the glucose would be absorbed, and then ultimately it would be taken from the small intestines with the help of the hepatic portal vein, and then we would carry it to the liver. And from there, you see that the blood glucose level would be raised. And when the blood glucose level would be raised, ultimately this would be detected by the pancreas. And what the pancreas they would do, that they would start secreting the insulin hormone, and this insulin hormone would come into the blood plasma, and from here it would come toward its target organ, and among them we have the liver and the muscles. Now, once the insulin has binded with the receptors that we have in the cells of the liver and the muscles, so this insulin would bring about some change to to the glucose molecules, and by that the blood glucose level would fall. Now, what the insulin would do, that it would cause an increased uptake of the glucose from the blood plasma into the cells of the liver and the muscles. And when this has come into the liver, so here the excess glucose that we have got in this liver, so it would be converted into a complex polysaccharide, and that is the glycogen with us. And by that, the amount of the glucose in the blood plasma, it would it would decrease, or it would fall. Now on the other way around, there could be a this second situation as well, where the blood glucose level it can decrease in my body. And how that can decrease, like if I did not eat the meal for the long, or if I was fasting, or if we were exercising, so the blood glucose level would fall. And when the blood glucose level would fall, so it would again be detected by the pancreas, and now the pancreas they would release another hormone out of it, and that hormone is the glucagon hormone. That glucagon hormone again would be carried to its target organ, which is the liver with us. And if you remember above, earlier when the blood glucose level was high, so we converted the glucose into the glycogen. Now, since we have got the glycogen stored in the liver, so this glucagon would again bind with the receptors of the liver cell, and the time it would bind, so any of the stored glycogen that we have in the liver, it would be broken down into the glucose molecules. These glucose molecules would diffuse out into the blood plasma, and by that, the blood glucose level would be elevated. Now, if I were to summarize all of this, so if you just see this simple diagram, so initially the blood glucose level was raised after a meal in in the blood, and this was detected by the pancreas, which is secreting this insulin. Insulin would stimulate the cells of the muscles to take up this excess glucose and would convert the soluble glucose, and it would be reverted into and it would be converted into the insoluble glycogen, and by that the blood glucose level would fall or it would be decreased. Now on the other way around, like if I had got my normal blood glucose level at this point, but this is falling below the set level, now, the pancreas are releasing the glucagon. The glucagon would come to the liver, and here it would break down the glycogen to the glucose, and the glucose would be released into the bloodstream, and by that, the blood glucose level would also increase. And we will see in a while that not only the glucagon have an ability to convert the glycogen into the glucose, but the adrenaline hormone can also do it when it has to prepare our body for the fight or the flight situation. Now, let me quickly take you toward the role of the adrenaline hormone, where it has to prepare the human body for an emergency situation. So, since this prepares the body for the fight and the flight situation, so that is why we term this as an emergency hormone. The gland which is releasing this adrenaline is the adrenal gland, and if I were to take you to the location of the adrenal gland, so this is lying on the top of the kidneys in our abdominal cavity. So here we have these kidneys, and on the top of the kidneys, now we have got these adrenal glands lying here. And when we are in emergency situation, like if we fall randomly into the water, or if we were in a street and some of the stray dog they were behind us, or if we were coming across some robbers or a thing like that, so now my body has to be prepared for the fight or the flight situation. Like either I can fight back, or in worst scenario we can be in a flight situation where we would run off from that emergency situation. Now here the thing is that what needs to be done during an emergency situation. So you see that in the emergency situation, it is important that I should have some proper vision, because if I would not have a proper vision, then neither I can fight properly, neither I can flight properly. Other than that, I have to make sure that the muscles of my body they should contract more so that we can be overcoming the emergency situation. And you may have noticed that our heart and the breathing rate they should also increase, because I would want that to my muscle tissue, since they have started to contract more in emergency situations, so they should receive more oxygen gas and the glucose, and by that they should release more of the energy so that we can overcome this kind of the emergency situation. So here we will quickly see that what this adrenaline hormone is actually doing. So you see earlier in the nervous coordination chapter, I have taught you about the eyes. So in the eyes we have this pupil, and this pupil is something that actually controls the entry of the light. So you see that this adrenaline would bring about the dilation of the pupil. And when the pupil would be dilated, so more light would enter. And when more light would enter, then that means that we would have a very good view now. And at the same time, what I need to do is that the glycogen which is stored in my liver, I have to be converting it into more of the glucose, because you see that when we are in emergency situation, so my muscles they would start to contract more, and for that purpose they need to have more glucose and oxygen gas delivered to them. So when the glycogen is converted into glucose, so the glucose level has already elevated, but we need to be delivering it at a fast rate to the muscle tissues. So for that purpose our heart rate would also increase. At the same time, for my muscles to be respiring more aerobically, to be releasing more of the energy, I also have to increase the depth of my breathing, or the depth of the ventilation, so we can now take more oxygen gas into the body or into the alveoli of my lungs. Now, since we have got more glucose getting out of the glycogen, and by enhanced breathing rate, we have brought more oxygen gas into the alveoli, so this increased heart rate would now deliver this more oxygen gas and this more glucose to the muscle tissues. They would respire more, and more of the energy would be released. that would allow us to be prepared for the fight or the flight situation. And at the same time, the blood supply would be diverted more toward the brain and the heart, because since we are in emergency situation, so we would never want that the functionality of the brain and the heart should be compromised. So more blood supply would be taken from the mesenteric organs, like from my intestine and the abdominal cavity that I have. So from there, the blood would be diverted more toward this brain and the heart. So I hope you would be clear with the mode of action of the insulin and the glucagon and this adrenaline hormone that we have with us.